Oh, hi, everybody. Welcome to this very special live stream. I am super happy to be joined, first and foremost, by one of my oldest and dearest YouTube friends, Kristi Winters. Hi,
Oh,
Kristi.
oh yeah, Steve, I was your very first patron donor.
You
Wait,
were, that's
yes. When
right.
you read out the list, mine was the first name you read out.
Uh,
That's how far back we go. And
we
I'm
go
still I'm
back.
still a contributor to this day.
And I would be your
I don't think
friend
I ever
even
will
if
not, but you
I
do.
would be your friend even if you weren't giving me money. And we have come back together because we've done this once before with
Yes.
the third member of our trio here. Would you like to introduce who else is with us, Christy?
Yeah, so James is actually I think between my channel and your channel, we've done three now, right? We did the
Right.
initial scary ones, under the bed thing, which still haunts me. And we did the artwork, the very like an abstract COVID trapped claustrophobic
Mhm.
animation that you did. And now you're back with something new. And we finally got our schedules to coordinate. So James Mansell, welcome back. This time on
Thank
Steve
you.
Shives' channel. So yeah, what you been up to?
Yeah, a lot. Trying to do a lot. Yep. Yeah, I had a look. It was 3 years ago that we were last talking horror films. But yeah, things have progressed. It's less sort of overt horror. It's now trying something else. So yeah, it's been a busy few years. So yeah, this new project, it's been about 4 years. So I think there was probably a bit of an overlap when we last spoke. So yeah, excited to talk to you guys about it.
About Leviathan.
Leviathan,
That's right.
yes.
So,
Which is so Christy and I have both watched it, and what it is at the moment, it is a short film.
That's
But
right.
the idea is, fingers crossed, eventually it will be more than that.
That's right. Yeah, it is a short film. I kind of call it a short film slash proof of concept. And I think every short film I've done, you have the idea that it could be a proof of concept for something else, that you can't really wrap up a whole idea and all your ideas,
Right.
aesthetically and creatively in a short film. There's surely something else out there. So yeah, this is very much a proof of concept, and yeah, there's big plans hopefully for it, but also it's a short film in itself, which is supposed to feel like there's some closure, and it's satisfying in and of itself. But yeah, there's more.
well, I think we've teased the audience enough. Why don't you give us whatever your elevator pitch is, so we can actually start to talk about it? And then when it's appropriate, Steve's got a short clip that
We yes.
we'll throw to the clip like they do in late night television,
Yeah.
and see a little. But yeah, before we do that for the audience, tell us a bit more about Leviathan.
So Leviathan is a an adaptation, a short film adaptation, which I'm not sure there are many of, but it is based on a book about Jack the Ripper called A Knife in the Fog, written by Bradley Harper. So the film is well, the book is a story of Arthur Conan Doyle. And the idea is that what if Arthur Conan Doyle was on the case of Jack the Ripper? So that's sort of the premise of the book. He gets invited, and he was this all crossed over in reality, and he was invited in the book. He's invited to come to Whitechapel. There has been two of the Whitechapel murders. One, it's pretty early on in the spree, and he's invited to come and help. And he says, because he's written one Sherlock Holmes story. So in 1888, he had published a study in Scarlet, which was his only story so far, and everyone liked it. And he's invited to come and help solve the crime. And he says, well, I can't do it alone. I must invite my professor who lectured at Edinburgh University. Who this is Dr. Joseph Bell, Professor Joseph Bell, who's a very famous doctor. He was Queen Victoria's favorite physician when she was in Edinburgh, and he was the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes, which is all true. And in the book, he gets invited to help solve the Jack the Ripper murders, and along the way, they pick up Margaret Harkness, who was a liberal, a radical writer at the time. She was in her late 20s, and was very prominent in the East End at that time. So they go on the case, and it turns into a Sherlock Holmesian crime mystery. The short film is a it takes one scene and it tries to put the essence of the book into one scene. And in our scene, that's not the elevator pitch. That's a very long-winded explaining it. The pitch for this,
Long elevator.
an unlikely trio comes together to help solve the mystery and catch Jack the Ripper. And our scene finds them one very dark and stormy night over a body of Catherine Eddowes, who was the fourth victim of the five. And they have to come to terms with each other and their differencing personalities and opinions and who they were at the time and how they saw this, and try and somehow find some common ground and work together to help solve the case.
The creator of Sherlock Holmes helping to solve the Jack the Ripper murders. That's
right.
So what if for Marvel's? Yeah, you could see.
Yeah.
It's a really okay. So, do you want to just play a clip from it, and then we can dive more into it? Because there are several things about the concept of it, and I thank you, James, for even bringing the story to my attention, because I was unfamiliar with the novel that it's adapted from, let alone having the thought, the sort of what if question of, hey, wouldn't that have been interesting? But there's a lot about just the sort of concept of it that fascinates me, that I would love to talk about. But shall we?
Yeah. Do you want to set it up while Steve does who are we going to see? What is the scene that we're going to watch?
So the three characters in the film are Arthur Conan Doyle, who's obviously wrote Sherlock Holmes, Margaret Harkness, and Joseph Bell. And the scene, so this is a clip sort of halfway through the film, and this is they are midway through their conversation, and they are and on the slab in front of them is the body of Catherine Eddowes, who is famous to anyone interested in Jack the Ripper. She was so this is September 30th, which is a well-known date. It's the date of the double event where there were two women were killed, and this is the second of them. And in this clip, they touch on the Dear Boss letter, which is a famous letter that had been sent 3 days earlier to this date, which is where the name Jack the Ripper comes from, and that's touched on a little bit. But yeah, it's a short little clip from a scene which is about 15 minutes in total, and this is a couple of minutes from the middle of it.
All right, let's watch a couple of minutes of Leviathan.
Surgeon noted the amputated ears fell from the wagon when the body was removed.
Just like the letters in the paper. The one signed Jack the Ripper. He said he'd nick the next victim's ears. This proves our killer wrote it.
It proves he read it. The letter was clearly a hoax.
Clearly?
The letter was sent to the Central News Agency. Are you familiar with that institution? They do not print anything themselves. Rather, they sell their reports to others. Only a journalist would know they exist or how to contact them.
Making the most likely author. A reporter for the agency. You know the killer has acted on this false message. The writer will doubtless compose more flights of fancy.
Leading the police even further astray. Folly heaped upon misery.
Note, the uterus has been removed without nicking the bladder.
In a dark public space. In under 15 minutes.
A surgeon, perhaps?
Possibly. Or a butcher.
Or a hunter?
Her right kidney is gone too. With Annie Chapman, the killer took the uterus. Well, this is new.
Perhaps he is using their bodies to learn anatomy.
Ooh, that's all we get to see.
What was that noise?
So while I get us back on screen here, it'll just take a second. There we go. Hi, everybody again. So yeah, that's our three main characters sort of talking through some. I mean, if you're a Jack the Ripper nerd, it's some kind of well-known parts of the lore and of some of the theories around that crime, right? Because one of the major theories about who Jack the Ripper was is that he was a doctor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's I mean it's very well researched, and you know there was we've had a lot of people watch it that know an awful lot more about Jack the Ripper than I do, and I think that's part of the fun of it is that accuracy and trying to you know you're playing with real facts, and you know you have to follow them, and that's all really just was very interesting to work with. And but yeah, so that's it's all quite familiar ground to to anyone interested in Jack the Ripper and Ripperologists and that sort of thing. I mean, one thing we don't do is go really far into some of like the conspiracy theories. We
Right.
sort of touch on the details around that particular moment, but it stays quite sort of granular and in the room with the three of them. The idea teasing that there's this huge world outside of this that, you know, we could go and explore, but we keep very much sort of inside this room with the three of them.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there are plenty of other projects already that go into the conspiracy theory stuff.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, if you really wanted it to seem like a rehash, then go that direction, because it seems like that's the direction everybody wants to go is, you know, was he royalty? Was he some famous person? You know, just judging by what we have, what you've presented. I mean, I think it's interesting how you can always somebody can always find another angle. And the idea of like not only the participation of Conan Doyle being supposed, but also just the forensic angle of the scene, you know, that is Leviathan. It's just, I've never seen it explored in quite that way before. You know, where they're focusing on, okay, let's look at like a forensic angle and medical investigation, trying to figure out what was actually done to these women and who might have done it. You know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was definitely one of the appeals for me for this to make this, that the film sort of goes through phases. We have the interaction of the three of them, and then the middle section is very much a them being detectives and that sort of tennis match with them trying to pass things across. And but I think the issue with Jack the Ripper is it's very romanticized, and you know I rewatched things like From Hell, and you know the most recent times it was someone ever tried to do something with it, and it's very, you know, it's very sort of they glorify it and all the wrong parts, and it becomes very dated. So trying to do it in a much more realistic and sort of authentic way, that this is sort of how they probably would have tried to figure it out and to talk about it. And but the other part of it is not focusing too much on the sort of the graphic details of it, and you know that's not really the point, or it shouldn't be anymore. It should be you know, it should have moved on from that. There's other angles, and there's so much else that's so interesting about Jack the Ripper at the moment. And that was you know, we never actually see the body, we never see a wound, we never see anything, you know, which came out of a necessity from a budget constraint, but actually then worked into a more interesting angle that that focusing on these people and how they are trying to deal with this, and is far more interesting, and there's far more to say in that than horrifying details of what happened to these people, which everybody knows and can imagine. So yeah, it was great trying to find new ways into a very well-mined subject and try and put something different on it. And that's where the books is a new angle to Sherlock Holmes and Jack the Ripper that has been done ad infinitum. So this was a way of finding a different way to sort of to tell a very well-known story.
If I could, one thing that what you said about the constraints of the budget, I remember, I think it was the Danse Macabre when Stephen King was talking about writing horror, and when you start to allude to, in this case, a monster, what people can imagine is always much more terrifying than what an author can put on the page. So, you know, at some point though, he says you have to show the monster, and you know, the door is thrown open and it's a 10-foot cockroach, and you're like, oh, that's scary, but I thought it was going to be 100-foot, you know. So in some ways our own imaginations fill that gap in the scene, and it's not necessary, it's not in any way needed for the scene, wouldn't add anything. And so allowing the audience to just through the description picture it themselves is probably going to be even more horrifying than what you could show on screen. The other thing too that I wanted to mention that that stuck out to me and I liked a lot was, let me just rewind. Kevin and I, in our attempts to, we mostly cover in the Kristi and Kevin's happy hour, we generally cover politics, but covering like the rise of fascism in America and like Labour becoming conservative in the UK is just like so exhausting. That occasionally we dip out into other topics, and we dipped into a channel that's dedicated to reviewing museums. And there's a woman who runs the channel, and she did a review of the Ripper Museum and normally she's very complimentary on museums. She ripped this one to shreds. And what she used to also do Ripper tours in London because they're very popular. And what she now reflects on is the fact that women who are the victims of the Ripper aren't really people. You know, when you talked about how Ripper murders were sort of romanticized, part of that comes at the expense of the humanity of the women that he stalked and brutally took their lives too early from them. And so I like the fact that your character in some ways becomes their voice and is there to put a kibosh on that romanticization of it, where it's all about the mystery of the man, presumably, and not about the tragedy of the women. And so thank you for that. I think it's actually, I don't want to say if it's necessarily a feminist take, but it's certainly informed by feminist critique of the way that women are often objectified or dehumanized in order to give more attention to a male subject. So yeah, and then I've got more things that I want to say, but I don't want to dominate the conversation. So, yeah.
No, I think that's really great to hear. That was definitely on everyone's minds when we were working on the screenplay and trying to figure out who Margaret Harkness is in this. I've come into Jack the Ripper obviously fascinated for a long time about everything to do with it, but there's a very recent, quite dramatic shift in historians, and most particularly there's a really, really great book which is I highly recommend, called The Five by Hallie Rubenholt. And she's the first historian who actually did an extensive amount of research into the canonical fives and who they were, and the book is spread out into the five women and their stories. The story finishes when Jack the Ripper appears, so it is basically her saying that it does not matter who he was. Like, that's actually not the point. That he most likely was a few people. There's a Aaron Kosminski seems to be the name everyone says. That's probably who he was. He was, he ended up in a mental asylum when the killing stopped. But the treatment of the women from the press at the exact time it happened for 100 and however long, 30 years, hasn't really changed. And I think that Margaret was a person who was obviously, she was alive in the East End. There's no record of her mentioning it, but she lived there, and she certainly wrote about the poverty in the East End. So this was, yeah, she was the chance in this film to be the voice of the women, and we paid quite careful attention to the language she used. So, you know, she does never refers to them as victims. She refers to them by name, and Doyle and Bell are the status quo of, they are into the mystery, and they are just, it's a game to them, and you know, the humanity has gone to them. So it's, yeah, it's great that's clear and it's come across, because that was certainly it felt like that was the only way to treat certainly Margaret's character. But I don't think you could do Jack the Ripper now and just do a fun, enjoyable film about what happened. It's so yeah, no, that's great to hear. That means, I think that worked.
It did. She totally gave me like bomb throwing suffragette vibes, by the way. Not in that
definitely.
scene, but
Definitely.
yes. Thank you for mentioning Belle, because I had like made some notes just rewatching the scene, and I had Margaret Doyle and Hottie McBody, because I couldn't remember.
Hottie McBody? That's your little fill-in for Dr.
Yeah.
Joseph Bell?
Yes.
Hottie McBody, you know, the third one.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you said Bell, and oh yeah, that was it. And I crossed out Hottie McBody, and I wrote his name down.
Yeah.
You know, the real life
puppy
inspiration
dog
for
eyes.
Sherlock Holmes, Hottie McBody. Everybody knows that.
It was a lot of fun. But so the way what originally drew me to this book was I decided I wanted to read a fictional account of Jack the Ripper, and I'm sure there were some. So I found some top 10 lists of fictional stories based on Jack the Ripper, and this came up. The reason I read this one is because Josabelle is a character in it. Josabelle is also my great grandfather. So like that's,
yeah, you mentioned that in our emails. I was hoping we'd get around to that. Yeah, you actually have a family connection to one of the characters who is also a real person.
Yeah, so I've grown up with Belle being this, having this fun fact that my great grandfather was the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes. So, so that was a lot of fun. And then obviously Matthew Lloyd Davies, who plays him, just having him, you know, try being him on set, and so that was fun. And my dad, who's very interested in our history, and he's quite close to my, you know, the much elderly relatives that had even closer connection, he came along to the screening we did, you know, and so yeah, that's been a fun little family connection to this, which made it a little bit surreal at times, but yeah, always interesting.
I can imagine. Well, it's always interesting, and I often gravitate to stories like this where you're taking, the characters are based on real people, so you're taking real historical people, and in this case, I mean, they lived beyond living memory, but at the same time, they also didn't live all that long ago. So it's not like you're doing like something from ancient Rome or whatever. You're talking about relatively contemporary figures, and they're real. And you're putting them into a story where they're doing the kinds of things that they probably did in their life, but they never did this exact thing, you know? And there's something fascinating about them, just sort of lightly remixing, you know, not quite an alternate history in the sense that, you know, it's like a completely different reality that's unrecognizable, but just a little bit of a what if, you know? And it's a really fascinating setup.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, a lot is in the book that we use, but I think it was, and that's the issue with any small project like this. You don't have months and months to do research. You know, I don't get to go and speak to, like you would on a larger project. You would go and speak to the relatives, and you get a sense of who they were. But just say with someone like Arthur Conan Doyle, thinking of who he was at the time. So I think he's 29 at this point. He's had one story published that was a success, but he's a GP. His wife is pregnant. He is unsure what he's doing. He's not the Conan Doyle. He's not the Arthur Conan Doyle that we probably come to know him as. So in the book, he starts this journey with some trepidation. He's not really sure he should be doing this. He has no confidence in his own ability. He's basically Watson in the story. He's Watson in the book, and Bell is Sherlock Holmes. And Joseph Bell is far more progressive, is open, is I'm a big fan of well, I was with House, the Hugh Laurie show.
Oh yes, big time fan.
Which obviously House is Sherlock Holmes, and
yeah.
What's his Robert Sean Leonard's character Wilson is Watson.
Yeah.
So that sort of reckless, slightly sociopathic outlook on life that House has is was a that was sort of in the back of my mind. With it doesn't really come across in the film, but in House, I don't know, season 5 or something, Wilson gets House as a gift, a memoir of Joseph Bell, and House throws it away because he doesn't want to read it. That was
I remember that.
Yeah.
All right,
So, yeah.
I think I was a bit mixed up. The young guy is Doyle.
The young guy. Yeah.
All right, that was saying I was too distracted by his.
Oh, that's why you said Hottie McBody, because he's the hot young
and
guy.
Then the guy with the
thought
Scottish
like
accent. Then the guy with the Scottish accent is the doctor. So he's okay. Sorry, I was watching this after a nap.
So what would you have called him if you didn't? If
Silver Fox.
So okay,
Yeah.
that's acceptable, I guess.
I think he looks quite close to what Joseph Bell. There's a photograph of Joseph Bell, which if you Google Joseph Bell, there's lots of photographs were taken of him, and he looks just like.
Well, he looks a bit like you.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's
Family resemblance, yeah.
One of the casting criteria. You have to look,
he's got to look.
Yeah,
he's got to
yeah.
at least look a little bit like
have
me,
a-
because come
a
on.
little bit of a Mansell look going on.
Yeah.
So aside from the story, can I just say, like, I and watching it again, I thought the lighting. I mean, we're just going to talk craft now, if we can. I love the lighting in the room. I don't know if you want to take these one by one, or I thought the costuming was completely on point. I thought the musical underscore also very nicely done, very subtle, but certainly well timed and add to the atmosphere, and the sound engineering with the occasional thunder in the background. So I don't know if Steve wants to comment at all before we.
Well, I mean, obviously James is the one who has the expertise, but like I will second everything that Kristi just said, and specifically the sound design. I know, and we may have talked about this the last time you and I talked, James, but as you know, someone who makes films on very limited budgets, sound is incredibly difficult to get right. And the sound in this, not just, obviously the dialogue is great, but yeah, there's the entire sound design, the rain, the music, it's all just terrific. So, kudos on that. And yeah, just talk a little bit about how you realize all of these authentic details.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, this is having with this project, having a little bit of rope for these areas, whereas projects before, it's you're with sound design, it's all done yourself, and you have to just find whatever you can, and you have to pass a sort of professional barrier that you don't look amateur, so it's not distracting, it adds to it, all that sort of. As soon as you get over it, you're like, great, at least I've achieved that. No matter what else happens, we had a tiny bit more rope to just go for it. And this was an exercise in, I have this much to go out to everyone I know, the contacts I have, who I've built up over a decade, and asked for a lot of favors. So we went to all those elements. Basically, we were at very, very high standards with everyone we were able to use. And as a filmmaker, that's there is, of all the components that goes into making something that a director should sort of oversee, and the one I have the most confidence at this stage, and the one I enjoy the most, are all those elements. So when we finished this film, I had absolutely no doubt that all of those parts would just be, that they were the most fun. That's what I love. I mean, with sound design, we went to an amazing company called Pip Studios, who who do a lot of very, very big movies in Hollywood. And it's, you know, we had the way I pitched it to them was, first of all, you should give them license to go and just have fun. You can't be too prescriptive with people. You have to go, here's, I'm not, you know, you're barely being paid anything, but within this world, there's nothing you can't play with. And giving, I think we had 4 sound designers. They kept tagging more on who wanted to be involved in it. And it was like, build a world, build a late Victorian Gothic world in sound. And the good thing was there's very few action sounds that needed any sync. So it's really just this bed that I gave them some key sounds that I thought would work just tonally. I love, and you know, like a fox shriek. It's, for me, I've always loved a fox shriek, and that's in there. Tumbling bell, cobbled, you know, a handsome cab on cobbled stones, and people arguing outside, and everything I do has a thunderstorm in it, because it's instantly evocative, and it's just, I mean, it's just the best thing to put in. So I think that was really about just letting them have fun with it, and giving them a brief which was prescriptive enough that I was going to get what I needed, but also they went away and they started doing their own Foley work. They went out and did field recordings, and it was also, I've never been in a late Victorian mortuary. I imagine you'll hear these sorts of sounds, but what if it was a sort of slightly twisted, kind of dreamy version of this? You might hear some strange. The Victorian era comes with visually as well, but with sound, with auditory, it comes with a type of sound. You know, it's sort of wood and stone, and maybe some metal. So you can imagine sounds that you can hear that can filter through the walls, which give you the sense of where you are. And the other great thing with sound design is you play with where sound design ends and music carries on. And a lot of these types of things, you don't know what's sound design, you don't know what's music, because it's very all atmospheric. And so that was great. I mean, the one job was just clean up the dialogue, make the dialogue sound okay, and you know, they gave it a little bit of an echo, made it sort of just work in that space. There was a door creak, which I think they, like, 5 of them worked on the door creak. It's made up of about 6 different sounds. But that's the stuff that they love. That, you know, that's why you become a sound designer. And I think a lot of times they don't get to do that sort of work. They just get, you know, they do a lot of sound mixing. So it's like, here's the sound design, mix this. And I'm like, well, you come up with it all. So yeah, I mean, I could carry on and on and on with sound design. I didn't want to sort of end it. So that was a lot of fun. But it's just world building, you know, like I draw quite a lot of inspiration from there's a type of ASMR video creation, which is like 10-hour long looping environments, and someone will make with, I mean, it'll all be done with the VO3 now, but originally it was sort of Unreal Engine, and basically you make like a Victorian tavern, empty, and you put your headphones on, you turn the lights off, and it's just about being in that world. And they do like medieval worlds, and you know, and all this sort of stuff. And I just sit and listen to all those different sounds, and it's about trying to, it's almost like it doesn't matter what they're saying, just transport someone into the room and let them be in it. That's, yeah, I mean, that's just the best stuff you can play with. That sandbox is amazing. So all those elements come back to that, you know, lighting, making that really dark oil lamp world. That's, you know, it's not lit properly, there's no backlights, you know, when you step back off the table, you're in darkness. The further back you go, the darker it gets. And the production design was a lot of fun, giving the production designers just a bit of a brief, and they went off and they brought back jars with anatomical body parts in. They had a brain that turned up, which they'd made, and you know, and just you let people have fun with it. You give them a bit of steering, but you just let's make a world, you know, and mainly just enjoy it. So yeah,
Sound like the anti-George Lucas director.
yeah.
You know, wants to control everything, like every piece of it. But you're like, no, I trust my people. Go and bring me back what you've got, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's it's working on a low budget, but the goal was make this not look, obviously everyone tries to make it not look low budget, but giving people a small brief, but then letting them, making sure they are probably doing the maximum creative work that they can do. So and then pretty much whatever they give you, you've only got a few goes at saying yes or no to it, but if you give them enough enough guidance and enough freedom, like everyone in this film, I looked at their work and I was like, I think it's probably the best work you could have done, because you wanted to keep doing it, because you just wanted to experiment, and then just make sure everyone has enjoyed the process and feels like creatively fulfilled. And then you can't be so prescriptive with this sort of thing if you want the best out of people, you're not giving them a huge project with lots of, you know, stuff. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you reminded me of something else I appreciated about it when you were describing the production design and the way the scene is lit, so that when they're close around the table, because the main light source is the light over the table, so when they're close to the table, they're well lit, and then when they back away, they're, you know, like you said, they're in darkness. What I really appreciate about it is it's a fairly darkly lit scene, but you can always see what's going on. And one of my huge pet peeves, and I'm like the millionth person to mention this, like everybody complains about darkness in modern movies, and how like a night scene or a scene where the scene is supposed to be darkly lit and you literally can't see anything that's happening on the screen. And you know, and sometimes I think, well, maybe it's just me, maybe it's my TV, maybe it's whatever. And then I go back and I watch a movie from 50 years ago and I'm like, oh no, it's definitely not just me. You know, like nighttime scene, it's the same TV I'm watching it on. Nighttime scenes used to be lit differently than they are now. And I don't know, I've heard various explanations for it, but in your film, it all takes place in this one fairly dimly lit room. And obviously there's bright light around the table, but there's other areas that are not as bright. And there are, you know, there's varying degrees of lighting in the room and in the scene. But I never feel like I'm just looking at sludge. Like, is there what is it that you are doing that Hollywood filmmakers with multi-million-dollar budgets are somehow not able to do, to show us a darkly lit scene that still you can tell what's going on?
Yeah. I completely agree. That does happen, and I think certainly our approach to this was, I think a lot of it's down to the color grading work. We could have made this a lot darker. You know, we lit it, we exposed it, and we treated it how we would, you know. So we could have. I think one of the grades was very dark, but it was really going in with this idea that this won't be seen primarily on cinema screens. You know, this won't be seen probably on. It's about looking at it as what is it? What am I making? And I know that people that grade, the cinematographers that work on, you know, like Game of Thrones and, you know, huge shows, which they work to the optimal viewing, which is a large TV in a very dark room with the correct brightness. So the colorist was, I think, going in with that sort of, what I was like, what are you grading this to? And he said grading it for the DCP, which is digital cinema package, which is for a cinema projection. And I was like, well, there's probably going to be on laptops and phones, if I'm brutally honest, sadly. So we did just go in and try and where it was exposed, it was definitely exposed. You know, we just made sure that it wasn't dark where if you watch this on the wrong device, you're just going to lose this information. You know, so it was very much just yes, we're trying to make this piece which is dark and atmospheric, and I wanted it dark in the dark areas, but at the same time, it's a bit it's not very realistic to imagine that this isn't going to be seen. Like case in point, I remember I screened this for some friends on a TV, and it was in a very bright room, and it was sunlight, it was not a very nice place to watch it.
Yeah.
And I remember quite a few years ago I did the same thing with a different film I made, and there were whole scenes nobody could see, and they were just like, we're just sort of guessing at this, which if you're making a small project, you have to, like, anywhere you can see it, one person watches it, it's a big deal. It's like, I've got someone to watch this. If they get halfway through and go, I can't even see it, I'm just going to stop. Like with bigger projects, who cares about all the people that didn't see it? Like the people that did see it correctly got the best experience. And with filming digital and those sort of decisions, it is just looking at the colorist and being like, what's this? And also when you upload to streamers and you upload to different places, you have different versions. So there's the version which is on that link looks different to the version you would see at a film festival. It's colored differently, so that was very much just making sure that this was going to do the job it was supposed to do, and not holding so dearly sacred the vision of it, despite sometimes it might not be perfect, but at least everyone can see it. So but yes, the idea was to make it dark and to make it there's a lot of I rewatched a lot of Ripper Street, which I was a big fan of Ripper Street, and I thought it's a brilliant show, but everything is very lit. It's like the dark scenes are lit very well, so you can see it all. So this was about lighting it with where would the lights be? So that central light over the table basically has a curtain around the light, and there's quite a hard drop off. And my idea was that when she's the only one that backs out of the light, when she kind of goes back into the darkness and she's out of the group for a minute, there's quite a considerable difference in her light. And then the way we cover her back there is, it's a bit of a like, let's just find her in the darkness in the corner instead of having this nicely lit with, when you're looking at cinematography with lighting, the backlight is always a very tricky light, because backlights are great for interviews, but when do you ever have a backlight, like a perfect light right behind you, unless you're in behind the sun's behind you, but then you wouldn't have a light in front of you. So it shows a quite it makes something look very, very set and very rigged and very, very, it's not how you light. And so that was something just to make sure we weren't doing the idea of having someone back up into a backlight just so they have that little kicker behind them is doesn't work with the rest of the idea of this sort of slightly rough type of approach to it. So yeah, a lot of factors at play, but the main one being just, it's got to work, it's got to be seen by everyone that happens to want to watch it.
Yeah, I was looking up a reference because your lighting reminded me, I think it was like I was listening to the audio commentary of Joss Whedon when he did Firefly, dating myself now, and he was talking about one of the scenes, I think it was like the battle scene in the opening episode, and he wanted it dark, but he wanted certain things lit, and he took his inspiration, I think it was from Unforgiven with Gene Hackman, which was like, basically there was a lot of dark and they lit what they needed to, but it wasn't like overlit, and yet that wasn't probably optimized for a digital watching environment, but it looks good on screen, and like it looks good, I'm sure, at the cinema, and it still looks good on a TV today because it's properly lit, so you can get that contrast without, and I hope I'm getting the right one, but I think I am. But yeah, it said low-key lighting and deep shadows to emphasize moral ambiguity.
Yep.
So, yes.
And
that's what I was like, that's the kind of vibe I got, and I like that a lot. It reminds me also of Renoir or other like Dutch painters who were starting to play with light around the time of like after the Renaissance, I think, you know, and they're starting to really look at using light to focus the mind and how light works on things and the shape of light when it hits certain fabrics or objects or shapes. And so, I thought that was pitch perfect.
Yeah, great. Good to hear. Yeah, no, I agree with all that. I think it's yeah, I mean, it's a great. I think nighttime scenes in this period is great to light because you just don't have very many light sources. The light sources are unreliable. We didn't get. I wanted to get into flickering light and trying to actually sort of understand the essence of what the light would be. This scale of project, you only get so far and then you have to stop. Whereas you knew if you had more time, you would do. We didn't do any camera tests. You know, that doesn't happen on short films. So trying to look at what would an oil lamp. You know, this is around the time oil lamps and gas lamps. You know, we'll probably be a little bit past oil lamps, but this is a very poor area of East London. What would the light have been? There wouldn't have been candlelight. So I never got to the bottom of what the light really would have been. We never see it. But the other big factor with the lighting is that the whole project is around practicality of managing to make the thing in the time you've got. So the shooting style and the lighting, I knew as soon as we had the location that we had to shoot 360 degrees. There's no, other than the camera crew and me and the small group of people, you can point anywhere. So essentially making it a play. So the lighting, as soon as we thought that, you just quite organically realize the lighting just has to filter out. So if I want to spin the camera from here to here, the lighting, wherever I put the camera, the lighting works. There's no additional lighting other than that main source. Also meaning to get through a 15-page script in 2 days with basically no lighting setup, no lighting changes. You know, other than the scene outside the door at the beginning when she comes in, you are live and you're in the room and you can run and you can move around. And so quite quickly the lighting setup seems to help inform the whole approach to the film and vice versa, and you hopefully try and sort of square the circle a little bit and make it all make sense, and it's all, you know. So the idea being the lighting works for the story and for the idea, but it also allowed us to technically achieve what we needed to do. There was no way we were going to change lighting setups every time we had to move the camera. That wasn't going to happen. So so that's always something you've got to just consider. It's not realistic to approach it in a certain way. So then what can we do with the lighting? And now let's make that work and make it feel like it was the only way to light it.
I think you said you had some stills. Now might be a good time to share those on screen if you're set. Because I think I got sharing. So I mean, might as well look at the lighting while we're talking about it, right? Because presumably it would be part of the stills. So.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I've pulled a few things up. So this is quite interesting actually. Is this? Can we see this, Steve? Is this interesting?
Yeah. We can see that.
Cool. Yeah. So this is so this was the original. This was basically a reference image pack that I put together for the DOP, and then pulling a lot of stills from modern films that had the similar sort of lighting. So this was our lighting approach to this, which is the color of the lighting. It's very, very hard lighting, low key, all that's kind of neo-noir, all that film noir, neo-noir stuff that's so good. All just felt quite natural, and I think we got the idea quite quickly just from looking at these. There's a lot of quite hot sources, and the practical lights are quite hot, but the faces aren't always actually lit, you know. So like this is great, you know, like there's a bit of modeling there, but they're pretty much in darkness. That's from The Last Duel, which is a great movie. Yeah, so that was what we went into, what me and the DOP discussed. And then I think I have, yeah, so this is off our press pack. So these are some stills from the film, which I think we got pretty close to that. You know, we didn't have any time to really pre-light. We had half a day to pre-light. It was sort of the first go at the lighting had to work, as is the case of these sorts of projects. So yeah, this was this is how it turned out, which I was very happy with. I mean, I think considering the size and scale of the project, I think this was great. I was very, very pleased with it.
What's really impressive is she's wearing a black dress, and yet you can make her out. You know, like you can make out her
Yeah.
black hat and her black dress, and she still has. She's not disappearing. She's still a distinct figure without like a whole lot of light, you know, on her. So, yeah, I mean the guys have the white, right? So they're easier to
Sure.
contrast in that way. So
Yeah.
I
That was
love the look of this.
Oh yeah. That was one thing, the shirts, one thing we had to spend a lot of time with on the grade was basically taking the color of all the shirts down. So the first thing you do with anything is you take all the white down to nothing is white, it's all off whites. So that's why you don't have white walls, because white just bounces light. So all of these, including the sheet on the body, it's all been dropped quite significantly in the color grade, which you imagine like this shoulder here, there's a big light bouncing off that, so that's been knocked down. So so we were able to go into that world briefly, kind of one go at it. We had a day on the grade. It's that sort of work that we realize things with more time just look the way they look, because they have that level of detail. But speaking of the I think, yeah, here. So speaking of the costume, so she's actually in a red dress.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's lost in the light. Yeah.
occasionally it comes across. But we wanted to somehow differentiate. You know, there's all wearing black. So this was from Catherine Poon, who's the costume designer in the film. Basically, this was sort of the first stage of the costume design, working out what could she be wearing. And then we decided, what if she had like a sort of crimson dress on, which you know brings with it a lot of ideas and what that might mean. And then I pulled some of these references, which are all from House of the Dragon, funnily enough, but just that that alternative black dress being dark red in dark scenes, and sort of how that looks. But this was amazing stage we went through, looking at Arthur Conan Doyle. These are all older photographs of him, but this is sort of, I think he's quite young in this one, but the costume reflecting the status of the character, and you know, and you looking down at the number of buttons. So this waistcoat, there's more buttons than
Oh yeah, I see the one that's a resemblance, I think.
Yeah,
in the
so that was
middle.
one thing. I'm not sure if we can see it here too much, but
Yeah.
that was something like, how do we portray a different status in costume? Every creative decision needs to be reinforced by the story or the characters or something. It can't just be because, you know, because they look cool. And sometimes you have to decide why something and go backwards and think, I'm not just gonna just go with this. Let's spend a bit of time thinking about this with the people you work with. And so and that was that being able to do that and have that time. And we had a costume fitting with the actors, which again, if you see any period film that's done on a very low budget, the clothes are supposed to be their clothes and they never fit. So the one thing we were like, how do we make this feel more real, is make the clothes fit them. So we had costume fittings with all of them, which yeah, I mean, if you find anything done, or if you see any period thing and period piece and the costumes don't fit, it's and I didn't quite know that so kind of specifically, but the costume designer said you have to have them fitted. It's one of those things which slightly out of reach on smaller projects, but you know, it seemed like the right thing to do. So
Also, I'm
Yeah.
really distracted at how much Doyle's character is giving me Pedro Pascal vibes in that particular shot.
The mustache. It's the mustache.
Yes,
Well, and
yes,
the angle
and the
too. He's
eyes.
got
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So
And
just
I mean, he is he's in the ballpark for a young Doyle. I mean, it's in term. I mean, obviously, there's more important things to casting than just do they look like the person, but that is a factor. And I mean, he is, he's you don't, sometimes you see an actor cast as a real person in a film or a TV show, and you look at him and you go, what were they thinking there? Like that's not even close. And hopefully the performance makes you forget about that. But with this, I mean, yeah, that it's like, okay, yeah, 20, 30, young 30 something Arthur Conan Doyle. Yeah, I'll buy that. That's in the ballpark. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting with these three because Margaret, there is one sketch of Margaret. There's which I think the casting, so there's a casting doc. Let me find this. Where are you? Yeah, so this is a document that went out for casting. But if I'll just go to the end. This was yeah, so this picture here is the only picture of Margaret Harkness that exists. Is a sketch. Nothing else exists. So you have to basically you're inventing a character that's and Lauren looks, I think she looks pretty close.
Yeah, definitely.
But and Bell, this is one of the famous pictures of him. I think Matthew looks close enough. Again, Doyle is probably the only one that I certainly felt like you need someone that does resemble him, because everyone who's read any Sherlock Holmes sees his picture. He has a mustache. He has the hair. Like he's the only one that has a little bit of a look to him that's well known. So, but with this project, we with the only actor we cast was Rafe Bird for Conan Doyle. Lauren Cornelius came from the producer that said, let's chat to Lauren, and so we didn't cast Margaret. We gave the part to Lauren, and then Matthew Lloyd Davies came with the writer who wrote the book. He also narrated the audiobook, and he's a very experienced actor, and sort of he was part of the package basically. So we went out to a lot of places for the part of Arthur Conan Doyle. And we paid everyone. That was one of the big things we wanted to make sure we did. Everyone on the film got paid. If you say there's a 2-day shoot in London, play Arthur Conan Doyle, and it's paid, like every single actor in the country is seen who wants to do a short film, who it may not go anywhere, it may never be seen. So it was a case of looking at after the first 50 people I looked at. Rafe Bird, he was interested in the project. He looked the part, and his audition tape was pretty good. And then you're like, you've just got to cast someone. You can only go so far. You can't, you hear bigger productions looking through 300 people, and then they go and look somewhere else, and it's just like, you've got to find someone and get them involved in the conversation. We were running out of time to cast him, and I felt I really wanted to just find anyone and then bring them into our conversations with the cast and the team, and get them talking, and get them and spend the time with somebody who may be pretty much okay, but spend the time just letting them sort of marinade in the world that we were trying to make, and instead of casting someone late who we thought we'd try and find someone perfect. So again, a small project up against that dilemma of who do you cast, and are they the right for the role? But that was the key, was getting them invested in the project and then letting them just commit themselves to it, which took some time. And I think Rafe Bird's brilliant in it. He did a great job.
Oh, he's excellent. Yeah, he's excellent. They're all three of them are good. What are I mean, just speaking more generally about your projects, like, are you the kind of person, are you the kind of filmmaker that sort of obsesses over casting, if you have the luxury to do that, or are you more someone who's just like, you find someone who looks right and you're like, okay, we're going with them, and it's more sort of instinctive?
Yeah, I mean, I've never been in a position where I've been able to uh to just continually look for someone and obsess over them. My my ethos as far as making things is done is better than perfect. I don't I feel when you're making smaller projects and the goal is make them, learn from them, meet people, make something else, bring people in, and having someone who was is right for the role at that time, who you knew, and is very I would rather have someone on the project this size who was who I thought maybe I could have found someone else who'd been slightly more right for the role, who was just so interested and put so much of them into it, and they just really wanted to be there, than someone who I was a fantastic actor and was perfect for the role, but didn't really want to be involved in this. So, funny enough, when we did want to cast this, we properly, we had two casting directors that were on the project at the start, and I wanted someone who had been in a show that I could use as a vehicle to say, well, it's this person who was in, you know, the likes of Bridgerton, all Game of Thrones, those sorts of British actors who aren't doing huge movies yet, so they're probably in a stage of their career where they would take on a short film if they got to play a real person and it was an interesting project. But you know, a couple of years and they'll be like, I'm not doing those small projects. And we spent a long time looking for people, and this document went out to try and entice people in who other actors in, and you know, so and what we found was that the people that were being approached were saying no, approach someone else, no, don't want to do it. Someone else read it but then said no, and I just said, I just need someone. I'd need anyone. I'm getting too close to this derailing the project just to find someone. And what I really didn't want is someone who did it for the pay and would kind of phone it in and maybe have a bit of an issue, because when you do a short film, it's not the infrastructure of the day is not what you'd be used to on a drama series with, you know, there is catering, but is it the nicest? Probably not. Is there, you know, all that sort of which everyone has to just be okay with. So this process was just, it ended up not being worth it. That said, if you make a short film and you have someone in it that carries a TV show like Bridgerton with it, a lot more eyes are on it. So yes, it's all probably is always something to try and aim for, but getting this made was the goal. And having someone there that maybe might not have felt a little bit fish out of water, I'm used to doing bigger things. It's like everyone felt like we were in just one team, you know, which this small project, everyone has to feel like that. You can't have anyone which feels like this is slightly beneath them, which a bigger actor might feel like that, which isn't particularly healthy for this sort of project.
So I'll mention as well, when we're talking about the cast, I'll just mention my one like constructive feedback, we'll call it. So I liked all of the actors. I mean, we'll just take the guy who played Bell, because he was just effortless. Like, he was so natural in his role. There were times that I felt like the energy between Doyle and Margaret was like, like she was quite intense, sometimes like really snarky, kind of bitchy. And Doyle was always this puppy dog-eyed, soft energy. Like, I kind of felt like if either he was more of a dick, I would understand where she was coming from. If he was, you know, or if maybe there's something that happens in a scene before this where there's like tension between them. I don't know the whole story, right? Because we just get this one little glimpse of the world. But I kind of always felt like she came in at 100, where like sometimes it felt like she could have come in like at about a 40, and then so I guess, but that was just my take on it. So yeah.
No, it's I agree that there's a lot that I think we could have finessed. But you know, it's again with this sort of project, I had 2 days to rehearse, I think originally planned, which again never get with short films. You literally turn up on the day and you just sort of try and get through it. And I thought with a 15-minute character piece, the the nuance of how they interact and how they are with each other and needs a lot of work, because that is the film. That's, there is a lot of other elements, but like this is it. If you strip everything away, you've got three people in a room interacting. And those rehearsal days all fell through. So
Oh,
so
yeah.
so we had a lot of Zoom meetings. We did table reads, but it was a case of the reading the lines through and then running a quick rehearsal, shooting it, and small notes, but large changes we weren't going to be able to get to.
Yeah.
So,
Or do multiple versions of the same scene with different energies, and you didn't have 5 days to shoot this.
If you have
Exactly.
two days for 15 pages is pretty tight. I mean,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it was. I think we were on a couple of, most things that are quick, you get a couple of, when you shoot a soap, you normally get 2 takes, but the characters, the actors know their characters.
Yeah.
They come in and they know if this actor is saying this line in this way, and they understand the context of the scene, you have to kind of go, well, you know the character. So, Lauren had never played Margaret Harkness. We'd never seen Margaret Harkness. We didn't know. And I think we tried to make her the center of it and tried to make her go on a more of a journey. Bell and Doyle kind of stay still a little bit. So it was easier to figure them out. I mean, it was a tricky scene to do. And if you were doing this on a run as a play, you would rehearse for weeks and weeks, and you would. So yeah, it's that feedback I've heard a lot.
Okay.
Feedback.
I'm not original in my, yeah.
But I mean, it proves it's right. I think it's but it's, that's just the job, trying to be there and also see things from different perspectives and stand back and think, and you can be very, very overwhelmed by a performance and think that's brilliant, but is it really right? And also the script. I mean, I think we had about 17 drafts. It was very hard to get to the script we wanted to shoot. So she still has to say those words, and it's, so yeah, I think a lot we could do again, which hopefully we'll get the chance
Yeah,
to.
Well,
exactly. Well,
yeah,
I'm
I
German.
was-
I'm basically German
ahead.
now, so I can't just say nice things. There always has to be some kind of criticism. Otherwise, they don't feel like you've given good feedback, or you haven't really paid attention if there isn't something. Yeah. So sorry, Steve.
Well, no, I mean, we were sort of circling back to something that when we were chatting very briefly before we started the stream, that this is sort of, it's a short film, and if anybody who, if you get to see it playing at a film festival, or it eventually gets released publicly in some format, it feels like a complete piece, but it's a short film. It's, a little over 15 minutes long. It's basically just one scene, and hopefully it will lead to opportunities to do it on a larger scale and on a larger running time as a feature or as a series or whatever. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's like, yeah, it's not perfect. I have basically the same criticisms of it that Kristi has, but when I look at it, I'm like, well, but it's a proof of concept. It's a presentation. It's sort of not even a pilot. It's sort of if you give us money to do a pilot, this is what we're capable of. And when you look at it that way, it's like, it's hard to imagine someone who is who is interested in a kind of project like this, I mean, you would think they would at least, give it some thought. They wouldn't just laugh you out of the room and go, yeah, no, whatever. We're not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's everything else. I mean, I wanted it to keep going. I was like, is this going to be a series? Like, am I going to see more of this from you? Like, when's part 2 coming out? When we got to the end. So, no, I was hooked. And I think that having Doyle too as a main character will immediately make it more interesting for a general audience, because if you do Jack the Ripper, like I said, it's been done in a certain kind of way, and doing it from this more sort of alternate history version with a very famous person who's known for detective work. Yeah, I think there's a lot of, and all the other things that we've just raved about and praised you to the skies also speak in favor of someone picking this up.
Yeah, there have been versions of this type of thing before. There's Joseph Bell has been on. There was a show called Murder Rooms where he appeared in. There was a show more recently in the UK called Arthur and George, where Arthur Conan Doyle is a young man in that. And so our hope is that if someone is looking for like you said, Steve, if someone is looking for a period mystery spin on Sherlock Holmes, not sure how you do that, maybe Jack the Ripper, Victorian era, it's an interesting angle on that. And I think the angle we're taking is to, obviously, the book is a Sherlock Holmes story. That's what the book is. But being able to find different avenues in the era. In the book, there's a character who suffers from phossy jaw, which, if either of you know anything about, was around this period there was women that worked in factories basically making matchsticks. They were called the matchstick girls, and the process of making them basically made them very ill, and it basically decayed their jaws. Their jaws got infected, and there's images of people sort of missing half their jaws. And if you watch a Victorian running show, you sometimes get sort of subplots that go into this world a little bit. And in the book, there's a character who has this, and Belle helps her, and we go into this world of it. And so there's a lot of opportunities to take these characters in this world and this period, and see where else we can go with them, and use Jack the Ripper more as a backdrop, and instead of this kind of bloodlust that is traditional on who he is and trying to catch him. And I'm a big fan of anything which takes the essence of something like that and then actually looks at it, and by the end it's like, you get crazed in the wrong area, and really it's a little bit like The Irishman. Remember the way The Irishman finishes is that Rob De Niro is an old man, and they're just like, it's all over, and they're asking him questions, and he still won't tell them because he's still in this sort of romanticized world of gangsters. And so it's a tricky world. It's a tricky world to write in, I think, because it is quite sensitive now, and you have to work out exactly what the area is, what you're doing. And but I hope the film is an example of the types of moments you could have in this with these characters. And Margaret's a fascinating person because she's an amazing person in history that no one's ever said anything about. She is untold that she was never married. She was a writer in a period where women, unless you were married, you were probably on the streets. And she's a brilliant vehicle for telling the story of not Jack the Ripper, but how women at the time ended up in a position that society would let them get, where they were killed by a person, by a madman. So
I don't know I don't know how historically accurate it would be, but because you'd have to check the time period against the movement. But I would love her sort of like be tempted to be drawn into the more radical wing of the suffrage movement. Just because, you know, like I think recently they celebrated something in Parliament about whatever, how many hundreds of years since a big moment in British women's rights, and with the suffragettes in particular. And you know, like you kind of like put under the rug that they were putting bombs in mailboxes and going on mass hunger strikes, and you know, wearing pants out in public, and you know, doing really radical things, chaining themselves to rails, you know, fences, like people's. And you know, one woman obviously threw herself under the king's horse. So you know, we tend to whitewash the more radical parts of history, and I just kind of feel she would almost like, at least the energy of the actress that kind of came in, like she would be like, oh man, should I? Like they're making a lot of really good points. As
I can
opposed to
picture
the,
her putting a bomb in a mailbox. This
yeah,
version of Margaret, I
exactly.
can picture her doing that.
Uh-huh. You know, and so instead of the whole like, oh, we can't upset the, you know, we have to become allies with the groups that are oppressing us, you know, like, no, fuck that, like throw bombs. You know, like, and that gets whitewashed out. So I'd kind of like to see that also as that, you know, I think you mentioned in the still I saw she was a little bit of the id, right, of the piece,
Yeah.
and then the ego and the super ego, and that would kind of at least that's that kind of id energy, you know, that more really radical energy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the next book he wrote is called it's called The Queen's Gambit. It unfortunately came out before the Netflix show. It's not related to it, but that's about Margaret. It's he kind of runs with Margaret's story. So yeah, she wrote a book called In Darkest London, which was, there's a quote at the beginning of the film from In Darkest London, which was published a year after the Jack the Ripper killings, so which is all about the East End. So really interesting person that I think is ready for a big budget TV show that we can all work on. So.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, it's just sort of a nexus of 3 or 4 areas that seem to be just endlessly fascinating to people, and 1 or 2 of which are really fascinating to me. I mean, you've got the Doyle's presence, which brings in the Sherlock Holmes nerds, and I'm one of those. And then, of course, there's Jack the Ripper, which is, you know, again, just endlessly fascinating. There's Margaret Harkness, who represents sort of the dawning suffragist movement and women's movement. And it's just it feels like if you are at all interested in anything to do with life in London in the late 19th century, like there's something in here that will be of some interest to you. But like obviously the Ripper angle is the one that's the most prominent. And I don't know, James, like as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, as someone who just is interested in these types of stories, as a reader, as an audience member, even, like, what do you think? What is it about Jack the Ripper specifically, that character, that story, that series of murders? Like, why is that the thing that people just never seem to get tired of? It's just endlessly fascinating. It drags us back again and again and again like a magnet, even though it's been, God, what, almost 150 years since those killings actually took place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for me, there's a whole bunch of reasons. I am, from someone that just loves just any sort of Victorian London is just an endlessly interesting, atmospheric. It's if you're interested in anything sort of the darker side of and you know with horror and Gothic, the Gothic aesthetic, Victorian London is just is an amazing place to think about, and there's countless characters from the real world and from fiction, and it feels, it's very relatable. London doesn't look so much different, but it also feels like a totally different world. So I think being in that world and reading about that, and that's it is engrossing, and it's endless how interesting that can be. But then I think with Jack the Ripper, I think because it's been so long, and any unsolved mystery which has huge amounts of research and time spent into them. It's a mine of information, and it's the unknown. It's the mystery of that's what I think draws me and draws so many people to anything, is as if there's an element of a mystery, that there's a part of this we don't know. There isn't closure, so it can only just carry on going, and you can take different ways into it, and the idea that the more you read about it, the more you learn, that you can join the endless pursuit of trying to figure these things out, is and I think that's the appeal of any crime show or any crime story which is unsolved. There's a bizarre interest in why that would even happen, um and yeah, and I think Jack the Ripper, because it almost takes place in this sort of completely different world, but and I think for me, because I lived in London for over 10 years, it's 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 still reminiscent of that period. It's yeah, yeah, maybe that's why. I'm not sure exactly. There's just something about it, It's like
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm trying to think of an earlier murder mystery, as it were. Well, first, just to the point, because this also came up with the critique of the museum, and Kevin was like, "Why do people watch true crime? It's kind of morbid." And I made the point that murder, there aren't that many crimes that have no statute of limitations. Like arson might be one, but murder is the one that there's no statute of limitations. And even now, we're doing using DNA on cold cases where the suspect that they end up closing the case on died, right? But there's still that desire for closure, because murder is like the worst crime. And at the time, I think, the reason why it kind of made it to the headlines in Victorian England was there was a bit of a morality issue as well, like in some ways blaming the women for the situations, they're out at night, or casting them all as sex workers, which they were not, that there's anything wrong with sex work. And so there was a bit of a moralizing that went with it, but and so it captured the headlines. But I'm trying to think of anything before Jack the Ripper that, it's like the Beatles, people are like, oh, bigger than Beatles. Well, if you have to compare yourself to the Beatles, and you're not as big as the Beatles, right? So who was the mystery before Jack the Ripper? I can't really think of one. Maybe Roanoke, but that was hardly even like that's just a weird mystery. It's not necessarily. And so in some ways it's the archetype of they didn't have the term, the serial killer thing, the horror and the fascination and the fear and the dread, but also wanting to know who done it at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think in popular culture, I think there is one. I think also, I think the Victorians had they had a real fascination with death and spirituality, and the supernatural, and there was a lot of there was a lot of morbid interests, and I think the way that I think it was probably the way that the press treated Jack the Ripper. You look at the tabloids coming out at the time of the murders. It was sensationalizing it, like it was incredible how they were treating it. And I think it was from the day after, it was this incredible, amazing thing that had happened that everyone was fascinated by. And I think it's all that's interesting in itself, the way that that was treated at the time. But it's yeah, it's I don't think there is anything else before it that's certainly not captured the public's sort of bizarre imagination like Jack the Ripper did.
Yeah. And it sort of happened at just the perfect moment where mass media existed in the form of newspapers, so people could follow the story. And like you said, different journalists, different papers covered it in different ways, and it was highly sensationalized. And he had he had a name. He had a pithy name. Oh, who Jack the Ripper? Like, how are you not interested in that? Especially if it's 1880s London, and what else is going on?
Yeah. And also
Especially
think
if you're a
about,
working class person. Yeah.
yeah. Also, the
Yeah.
levels of literacy were sufficient enough to keep tabloids in competition, right? And so there was also the capitalist element of it, of if it bleeds, it leads, right? And so finding stories or even making up stories to put on, because they had morning editions and evening editions, right? So they had to like move a lot of product, and they had to give people a reason to turn over their money, so there was also sensationalism for the purpose of capitalist competition.
Yeah. And it's a story without an ending is the other thing. I mean, I know, James, you touched on the fact that it's unsolved, which I agree. I think that is a major part of it. It's like, how can we possibly not know who this guy is? And you sort of like, you imagine like, oh, if he had committed these crimes, especially if he had committed these crimes in today's day and age, like, oh, we'd have his DNA, we'd know who he was. But it was modern enough that we know a lot about it, and there's so many details recorded about these crimes, so we can know a lot about what was done to whom, but for whatever reason, not enough to conclude, definitively who did this. So it's a story without an ending. And it's that, part of the reason why I think people are drawn to true crime in general, especially unsolved cases, like, yes, there is the fascination with mystery and the fascination with, oh, I wonder who did it, and maybe I can figure out who did it, or maybe somebody else will figure out who did it at one point. But there's also that kind of bleak sort of existential thought of, oh, it's a reminder that, sometimes these terrible things happen and there is no justice. Like these 5 women, at least, like the 5 sort of, accepted killings that were victims of Jack the Ripper. Well, we never found out who Jack was. And maybe he was punished for something at some point, but he was never brought to justice as Jack the Ripper. And these killings were never, there was no justice for these victims. And sometimes that just happens. And guess what? There's nothing we can do about it now because everybody's dead. And, so I think there's a kind of dark sort of existential thought there too, of like, oh, that's right. Sometimes terrible things happen and there's nothing we can do about it,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also, I mean, just talking about it being on the sort of the cusp of technological advances, the horribly famous and awful photograph of Mary Kelly, which is the 5th victim, which was the first crime scene photo that was ever taken. They are right on the tip of things changing, and it's a world, and London was polarized with one side, it was the empire, and the East End was in such poverty that it's a collision of so many factors that I think just keep people coming back to it. And as much as I want to, I do agree that there's been a necessary obsession with who he was, and a lot of missed opportunity to learn about who the people were, and there is still just a mystery, which I realize when I'm trying to make something, or that single element of and that's kind of in the film, that where there's that noise at the door, it's just that they don't know what's going on. It's a world which is not, it is off kilter and then unsure of everything, and that is a creatively, it's a fascinating place to work with, because there is no knowns, which is such a attractive world to play in. So Yeah, people will continue to be interested in this, which for a long time, and they won't ever. Yeah, they'll constantly say that it was this person, it was this person, but no one will ever know for sure. I don't think.
If I may, I think this would be an interesting point, seems to talk about the last piece of this whole thing, which is the audience. And, you know, you're trying to do basically kind of like a true crime thing, as you say. I think the police departments had only just been established in London at about this time. There might have been two competing, but like it's not like they had like really well developed procedures for all this stuff, or how to collect evidence, even like securing a scene. And so I thought the other thing that impressed me was that you kind of stuck to the spirit of, or the story sticks to the spirit of how Sir Arthur Conan Doyle thinks about things, or how they work out. For instance, you know, like the height, or which goes back to a study in Scarlet, right? Like how tall someone is, or left-handed, right-handed, these kinds of things that you can infer. That is, you're coming with an audience that's way more savvy, because we do consume true crime documentaries, and we do watch trials, and people do know about, you know, DNA and blood splatter evidence and all this stuff. Even if you aren't a fan of it, you kind of, by osmosis in the culture, as things are covered, start to get really sophisticated. And you know, I think that there's a, as long as you're staying within the world, I think of like Cadfile, the stories of Cadfile, and how Ellis Peters always was very fair in terms of the kinds of evidence that would be reasonable for a person at that period with his background to be able to notice and make valid inferences from. And I think that that would be the same here, you know, but it is, I think, harder writing for an audience. It's not like back in the 1960s when they were making movies about being on the moon and they didn't have to worry about people, you know, gravity in space, you know, just actors walking around a spaceship or whatever, because people weren't like, they would just buy that, you know. And it wasn't like Star Trek where you had some sort of gravity, you know, creation, like, or like enhancer or whatever to create the gravity effects. And so I think that's also a bit of a challenge for you as a writer, is to play fair with the audience, given how much they know, and how you know, how to interpret that and present that.
Yeah, it's definitely it's an interesting point to try and tackle. I think one of the hopes in this is that the characters are speaking as contemporary people. You know, we don't, certainly in this film, even more so with Margaret, she is supposed to sound contemporary. She may not use contemporary words, but it's not. You watch films, say from the 60s, trying to make films from this period. It's the language doesn't really work now. It sounds very, very odd, and so treating them as, you know, their brains were the same, and what was in front of them, and if there were different people working with the police who had the same forensic equipment and the same forensic background, could they have, you know, what could they have figured something out? And so it's and I guess that's the whole Sherlock Holmes thing, is you try and have this mastermind who can put things together, and I think that certainly with Jack the Ripper, the downfall of the police was forensics, and what they were able to do, but the way that the handling of the case, you know, that there's a one of the victims is found with some graffiti over the top of her, and they rub it out because they're worried about it causing issues with Jewish people in the, you know. So there's all these different things which there weren't people sort of adding things up, and that's what's interesting, is to come back to this and think, well, if a mind like Joseph Bell and Conan Doyle, and, you know, different people with different perspectives came, what could they figure out? And I don't think in my film, I don't think anything's figured out which they wouldn't have. I think it's more a case, is these three people together, where do they get to by trying to work together? And then they would go on and build on that and see where else they could their minds collectively could take them.
Yeah, it has the scene has a nice quality of it. They're not they're not Holmesian, any of them, because like Holmes and even in some of the original short stories, and in a lot of interpretations of Holmes, a lot of adaptations, he's almost superhuman. You know, like
Mhm.
he glances at something and he instantly knows like 100 things about it. And you know what I mean? And in Leviathan, it's like they're making inferences that educated people in their fields with their expertise would reasonably make. You know, if I, as an uneducated person, were to look at the victim of a Jack the Ripper murder, I would be like, the Michael Caine version of Sherlock Holmes from Without a Clue, where I'd be like, in my opinion, this person is dead, and that's all I got. Like that's the best I can do. But with your characters in Leviathan, it's no, they're not super people. They're drawing reasonable conclusions from what they see, and we're sort of able to follow that. Like the bit of, oh, okay, the this wound was drawn from this direction to that direction, therefore the killer must be, left-handed as opposed to right-handed. Like you can, and you watch it and you go, oh, okay, you know but at the same time it's not being spoon-fed to you, so it's not like you're not doing true crime 101 like Kristi was saying. Like we acknowledge, like, okay, people know a lot of this stuff already. People have seen true crime stuff and people have seen mystery stories before that focus on the forensics. So I mean, I'm not sure how much of that you said that there were uh many drafts of before you got to a shooting script. I don't know if that was part of what you were trying to dial in, sort of what angle to approach the actual forensic dialogue from or not, but you really find a nice happy medium to it, I think.
A lot of the forensic dialogue is there in the book. Brad was trained in forensics, so that
Oh, okay.
come from Brad's writing, and
there you go.
which is one of the things that makes the book really enjoyable to read. But I think with Sherlock Holmes, I mean, we played around with there were some drafts of a feature adaptation where Sherlock Holmes appears in a sort of dreamy thing, and I think Sherlock Holmes is a superhero. Like you watch Sherlock Holmes most recently. It's there is no, you don't get to do anything. Like it's not like, oh, I might try and I'll try and follow this. It's like,
Are we good with the H bomber's critique of Moffat's Sherlock Holmes?
Oh, Sherlock,
we're 100% right. That
yeah.
So I think with something like this, I mean, this is Joseph Bell was contacted by Scotland Yard and that's 100% true. They did ask him to come along and look at some information, and so if you Google Joseph Bell Jack the Ripper, a lot comes up. He's part of the story, and Arthur Conan Doyle probably could have been contacted, and so it's there isn't too much to try and invent. It really is, what if these people were there, what would they have done? And it's the idea that who they were as people may have driven them in different directions, and they may have not overlooked things. And the fact that in this film that Belle is welcoming of Margaret and says, come along, and you're a nurse, so what can you tell us? And you're a journalist, so what can you tell us? And it's that sort of thing which is a slightly different angle into Jack the Ripper, but in a way that I think you would have to do now, which you can buy this. There's nothing, no one is drawing conclusions which just, where on earth did that come from? That from his from somewhere else. So it's and that'll be that's the challenge of a long form version of this is finding that balance. And you're right, people know a lot of this certainly about Jack the Ripper, so making this a detective story that they're not just sort of going through the motions and you're like, I know all this already, nothing's different. I think that comes back to them as people and how they relate to each other, and them as a whole, where that goes, because there aren't stories about three people coming together and trying to do this. So and that's the challenge. You know, that's why this hopefully hasn't been done and would be something people would want to watch because it hasn't been seen before.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I'm keeping my fingers crossed for you, or as they say in Germany, ich drücke dir die Daumen. I press my thumbs for you. Like, go, yay, go, go, go. That's pressing the thumbs. So
Thank you. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
we'll see. Yeah, it's we're in a good stage. We're working on it, and I know there's people interested, and but period is tricky. It's tricky to make this sort of thing, and so we'll see. But it's yeah.
Well, if you get picked up by the BBC, I'm sure their wardrobe would be extensive at this point because of all the period pieces that they put up.
They just have
So-
they have just a warehouse. Like, come on,
Yes.
pick out what you need.
Or whatever production companies do stuff for the BBC.
Yeah.
Because it's not like I think it's easier
yeah.
to do pieces in the UK than the States.
Yeah.
Something tells me finding Victorian costume for it won't be a challenge.
Yeah,
I don't know. I just get the feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, any Kristi, did you have anything else?
No, this was such an enjoyable talk, and I hope we didn't like geek out too much beyond the audience for Steve's channel with all our stuff because we were gushing over the
Oh,
lighting
please.
and the technicals and the sound design and all of that. So hopefully, because people found it interesting and are very like, oh, there's a trailer. I know, Steve, if you could put the link to the trailer, I guess.
You know what? I should have added it to the description, but I will do that as soon as we're done. There'll be
Yeah.
a link in the description to the teaser, which is also in addition to the short clip that we watched earlier. Very compelling. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We got a special private viewing, but when it's made its rounds, as James said, you'll be releasing it more widely. So yeah. Just thanks for getting in touch and reaching out. And sorry it took us like a month to get it all coordinated, but I'm so glad we all persevered because this was a fascinating conversation and really a very, very compelling piece of cinema that you've created.
Absolutely.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And it's always a pleasure to talk. And I'll let you guys know how it all goes with the film. And
Yeah, hopefully, and before too long, we can be talking about it as it's been ordered to series, or
Yeah, exactly. Like we knew James way
Thanks.
back,
Oh,
like before
exactly.
he was doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah, before he was being aired on Channel 4 or BBC, whatever, America. Yeah, yes.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, we'll see. Yeah, fingers crossed.
Well, fingers crossed. Yeah, as we say in America, Kristi, fingers crossed. All right. Well, James, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll definitely do this again sometime. And everybody else who has been watching, thank you for joining us. And if you do happen to see Leviathan pop up at a film festival near you or in some other platform, do yourself a favor and check it out. All right. See everybody next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.